Okay, so we have code here that is usable, right? So the whole point of creating classes like this is so you don't have to be repeating this every time you want to use these objects. So how would I use this code in a different file? So let's now step out of our artifact.py, and I'm going to create a new script, and I'll just call it, I don't know, my program.py, and I'll save it. And so what I'll do now is if I want to use those artifact objects in this new file, and the reason I might want to do this is, you know, we're now here, we actually only have a script that's doing two things on lines 77 and 79, right? But I'm writing this after all of this class definition, and this might get pretty extensive in a larger program. So what I can do is over here in my program, if it's saved in the same directory as artifact.py, all I need to do is I need to say import my program, import artifact, and I can use it. So what I could do is I could say, for example, let's make it a equals artifact.novel, because we need to reach inside that artifact.py, and we do that with this dot notation. And I'll say, you know, the title is, you know, Fun Time Good Book, and this is by, you know, I don't know, Jack London. And the year is 1903. The file name is also text.txt because I don't actually have anything by Jack London. And the subgenre is snow venture. Okay, so I have this, and I can go ahead and print off some information about it. So we'll print a.title, a.author, a.year, and a.subgenre. Okay? So when I run this, I'll clear this, and I'll say Python my program. What happened? Look at this. This is a file with some text in it that I will parse Hemingway 1932 adventure. That's not anywhere in my program. My program just says, hey, create this novel and print this. It does do that. It says Fun Time Good Book by Jack London, 1903 Snow Venture. But it's also running the code in artifact.py. That's not a behavior we necessarily want, right? So I'm going to introduce a convention here that you probably have seen if you've ever Googled your coding problems, which I hope you have been, because that's the best way to solve them. And that is when you import a file to use all of these classes in it, it's also going to run the code. And we have code at the end of this file that exists. We could delete it, but we don't necessarily want to, because maybe for some reason we want to be able to run this file at some point in the future. All I need to do to prevent this from running when I import it is this. I'll say if underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals main, underscore underscore main underscore underscore, and then I'll put all of this inside this code block. And that's it. So if name is main, so what happens every time you run a piece of code is that it creates this namespace called main. And if the namespace is the main namespace, then it'll run this code. So what that means is now, sorry, I have to sneeze. Sorry about that. So if name equals main, it'll run this. So now, when I run my program again, it doesn't run that thing from the code. But if I run Python artifact, it still runs the code that exists there. Okay? So this is why you see that if name equals main a lot when you kind of see conventional Python programming. Now, if we wanted to get really conventional, we would add a run function and all of the code would exist in that, but that's not really what I want to talk about here. So we're getting very close. We're getting very close to the culmination of this workshop. We have code that's reusable, and it exists in this artifact.py, and we can load it into whatever it is that we're creating. But this still is a problem. We could copy artifact.py into all of our new library or all of our new folders to accompany all of our code. And to be fair, this is what I did for a long time. But the problem is when you have 50 versions of artifact.py all over your hard drive and you're creating a new project, which one's the most recent one? And why would you even want to do this? I mean, you don't. It's a bad idea because it's so easy to lose track of it. It's so easy to forget what the current state of the code is, and it's just not a great idea. So instead, what we want to do is we want to set this up so we can install it to the central location wherever our Python distribution is located. That way, we can just import it from wherever we are in our system. And there are a lot of advantages to this. Now, one thing we could do is we could take this artifact.py, copy it into wherever Python is installed, and then you'd be able to do that, except then if you ever reinstall Python or have some problems with it, it's very easy to lose track of it and delete it. So what you can do is you can just set up a folder somewhere on your hard drive that contains your analysis scripts. And I'm going to show you how to set it up so you can use pip to install it. Okay? So it's actually quite simple, but it's extremely useful. But before I get into that, are there any questions? Are there questions about why we might want to do this, or anything about importing, artifact, or any of that stuff? If not, yeah, question.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused about how it imports artifact. Does it just look in the folder for any PY files and look for classes?
Yeah, so what happens is anytime you import something, what Python will do is first it will look in your local folder for something called artifact.py or whatever.py. If it doesn't find it in the local folder, then it will look in where you have installed your Python installation. So, for example, when I import, and this is actually the source of a lot of bugs. So if I import OS, for example, what it'll do is the first thing Python does is it'll look in my folder. And it'll say, is there any file called OS? And if there's not, then it'll look for it in the central installation. And there are a few other places it'll look, but it has a hierarchy. And so if I have, in my perhaps foolishness, created a file called os.py locally, and then so I'll just show you. So for example, if I say, I'll call this os.py, and I'll just say print something hi. And if I go back over here into my program and I import OS, and then I say, do something like, what's a good use of OS? So if I say if os.path.isdir, so this is a way of checking if a folder exists, and I'll just say Yahoo. Then I'll say print found file or found folder. I think it's path.isdir. And so if I run this, and I run, that's the wrong one, Python artifact.py. Let's see. So my program, thank you. There we go. OK. Let's see. So what I'll try to make a folder called Yahoo and see folder Yahoo. Unless OS is one that it just will not do this for you, which would be, oh no, it found the folder. So let's try, what if I call this, what if I save this as NLTK? NLTK. OK. So now if I import NLTK over here in my program, let's try this. NLTK. And now if I say NLTK dot, let's see. what's a word tokenize? Is that a, you see it isn't finding NLTK, right? Because normally it would autocomplete. So if I say NLTK.word tokenize, and I try to say this is a sentence, if I run this, Python my program, module NLTK has no attribute word tokenize, but if I delete this, let's see, I'm going to delete this. I think word tokenize is in there. And now I'll go ahead and run this. Now it works. It takes a while to load it, but it worked, right? So I guess because OS is in the it's in the standard library, it probably knows to check first in the central distribution. But something like NLTK, which is part of the Anaconda distribution, but not part of the Python standard library, it's going to look for that in the local folder first. And when it finds something, it doesn't then go look for the central version. So for example, if this artifact.py, it's finding it because it just looks locally first. But if I, for example, move this onto my desktop out of here, and I try to run this again, let's clear this. It'll give me an error because it's not going to find it. It says, no module named artifact.
Okay. And if for some mad reason you want to import something that's on the desktop, would you be able to import it using the full file path?
That's actually a good question. We can try. I'm not actually sure. So we can try desktop/artifact. Invalid syntax. I think there is a way of specifying a path to import, but I would have to look up the syntax. I'm pretty sure there is a way, but in this particular case, it's a little more complicated to do that. It's best to have it kind of locally. Yeah. But we don't have to do that, and we're going to talk about how to set it up so that artifact.py is in that central location, so you don't need to worry about where it is in relation to your code. Okay? Other questions? Okay, so at this point, I'm going to need to set things up in a slightly different manner because Python expects a certain structure when you are building libraries. And so I am going to change, I'm going to change the name of my folder here to whatever it is that I might want to call my library, my personal set of codes, and I might call it something like PAV utilities or utils. You can really call it your code whatever you want to. Just try not to call it something that's already installed on your computer, because if you do that, then there can be issues when things run into each other and have collisions. So inside this file, I'm going to get rid of a few things. I'm going to get rid of all of this stuff that I created when I was showing you what I was doing. I'm going to get rid of text, Yahoo, and I'm just going to leave artifact by itself here. So what I need to do now is I'm going to create another folder, and I'm going to call this PAV utils also. So you see that these don't have to be the same name, but often that's kind of something that people end up doing. And so the PAV utils is going to contain all of the information I need to create my library. And then inside this inner folder with the same name, I'm going to put my artifact.py. Okay? So, and I'm doing this because there will need to be a number of files here that specify this as something that we can install. Okay? But inside this folder, I'm going to need one more thing. Python does not know, as it stands, that this is a module, that this is something that people will be importing and using. I need to create one more file here. And let's see, this has been deleted. We'll close that, not save that, close that. OK, So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to save it, underscore underscore init underscore underscore dot py. And I'm going to save that inside PAV utils. Okay? So inside that inner folder, I have my script called artifact.py, and I have this underscore underscore init underscore underscore dot py. Okay? That's it. I don't need to put anything in it. I just need it there because that's how Python knows that this is a module. So to get this set up to install, now I'm going to need a few extra things. Let's make another new file, and I'm going to call this one setup.py. Setup.py, and this one needs to go in this folder here. Okay, so I'll show you the structure here. So I'm going to save this as setup.py. In my Finder, I have, I'm going to delete this PyCache because I don't really need that. So I have, in this folder, PAV utils, I have a folder called PAV utils, and I have setup.py. Okay? And then inside this folder, I have the init, and I have the artifact.py. Are there any questions about that? So I have setup.py. There are a few other things that I'm going to want to have here. I'm going to want to have a license. Now, you don't have to have a license, but I would recommend it. And so license. It's usually in all caps with no extension. That's just how people often do it. And then I'm going to also have a README file. And I'm going to call this readme.md. Okay? So what I have here, and I'll leave them empty for the moment, is a directory structure that is my library with setup, README, license, and PAV utils. Now, if you don't include a license with the code that you write, the default expectation is you are retaining all copyright to the code. That means that people can't reuse your code without violating your rights to it. I am a big advocate of open source code, and so I would highly suggest, or I would highly recommend that you include an open source license. I'm partial to the Apache 2 license, which just basically says, don't sue me, but do whatever you want with this. I mean, it's a little more complicated. There's legalese. There are other things like the GNU public license. There's all sorts of open source licenses that you can use. I just recommend that particular one, but like I say, it's kind of up to you what you want. So what you would do is you would go and get the text of that license, and then you would stick it in this file called license. Are there any questions about that? Yeah.
What kind of file is licensed? It's not a PY.
No extension.
So it
Doesn't have an extension. I mean, it could be a .txt, that's fine. But generally, it doesn't have an extension. And I'm not exactly sure why that's the case. I don't know. If somebody in the comments knows, once this goes up on YouTube, I'd like to hear that. OK, so this is the structure of what we need. And the README file. The README file will contain a description of what your code does. And this is in the .md or Markdown format. And this is basically just a simplified way of formatting text. So for a heading, you have a hash tag, £, octothorpe, whatever. This, let's call this PAV utils. This is a suite of tools that I use for my analysis. Something like that. And of course, you could expand it with subheadings and more info and etc. Right? So the reason you'll do this is that should you decide eventually to put this online and let other people install it, this is all stuff that you would want to have. Because it will generate documentation for you when you create this. Okay? So we have a README file, a license file, and a setup.py. So this setup.py is really the key to our creating our installable library. Okay? So the first thing we want to do in setup.py is we want to import setup tools. So setup tools is a library that is part of the Python standard library that basically prepares your code to get installed. Okay? We want to open our README as a long description. So the process that I'm showing you just comes from the Python standard tutorial in doing this. So I can link to that if you have further questions about that. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say with open and the readme.md, I'm going to read this as rf, and I'll say long description equals rf.read. Okay? So essentially, I'm just opening up the README file as a string, and I'm saving it into this variable long description. So now what I want to do is I want to say setup tools dot setup, and here is where I give all of the different variables that set up my library as something that exists. So the first thing I need to do is I need to come up with a name for my library. So I might call mine PAVUtils. So here I'm going to say PAVUtils, and then conventionally what you'll do is you'll add a dash and then your username. And the reason you'll do this is if you upload this to the pip, the distribution platform, this will ensure that your code does not run into anybody else's because it'll be unique. So here I'm going to call it PAVUtils-virth. The next thing, so I have a comma, and then I'm going to add another variable, and this one is version. Now you don't need all of the things that I'm going to show you, but it's good to have them. So you want to give your code a version number. So you could be ambitious and say that this is version 1, or you could say this is 0.1, or you can do 0.0.1, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Yeah?
Does it have to be a string?
Yes, it needs to be a string. So, and I think most Python libraries are set up with this 3-number system. So we'll start with 0.0.1. The next thing you'll want to give is an author, and that's just your name. You don't have to give them your name. You can make up something. That's fine. But generally speaking, as people who use this for study, for research, it's good to have your name attached to what you're building. So we have your author. You can add your email. So author email. And I'll just put in my Leiden email. Oops. And this could be whatever email address you want to put in there. Here, then you'll give it a description. And I'll say a suite of DH tools. Okay? I'll give it a long description, and that's going to equal long description. That's just going to load in the README file, and this will generate a page on the pip repositories if you want it to. I would also like to give it, I'll tell it what kind of a file that long description is. So I'll give it a long description content type. And here I'm going to tell it that this is text and markdown. And I will also give it a URL. Where does it exist on the internet? This doesn't exist on the internet, so I might, I'll say this is at github.com/virth/pavutils, assuming that it actually existed there. The next thing is actually really critical. I want to tell Python what are the packages that my package relies on. So if I'm importing NLTK, I should be telling this setup tools that I'm doing that. But I don't want to have to remember everything that I imported. So what I can do is I can say packages equals setup tools dot find packages. with the parentheses there. So this will just look through my packages that I've imported, and it'll say, hey, you're importing this. So if somebody installs your code, then it will tell them the things that it depends on. And it might even install them for you. I'm not actually sure about that. Are there any questions so far? We're getting quite close to being able to install this. We also might want to add some keywords that describe our project. You know, I might add something like DH, I don't know, text analysis, I don't know, NLP. If I have data viz, I might have data visualization as a keyword. Any sort of keyword that'll help people find your code. Okay? Then I want to tell it what is the license that I've used. Now, here I'm going to say, let's say I used Apache license 2.0. And then the last thing I want to give it are classifiers. So this is a list. And these classifiers are sets of categories that will again help people find your code. And there's a specific syntax for these. So for example, I want to tell the repository that the programming language space Python ::3. So it's written in Python 3. I want to tell it my operating system ::OS independent, because anybody should be able to run this. I'll say development status is 1-planning. So there is a list of these online. These are standard classifiers. Let's see, 1 planning. And then the last one is license ::OSI approved Apache software license. Okay? So now for all that work, we have a setup that will help us install our code. So now I am in my workshop folder here. We can see I have my license, my README, my utilities, and my setup. Okay? Now, the moment of truth, pip install period. It's actually telling me it didn't install it because I already installed it when I was prepping this. But it's installed now. So my computer now has PAV utils virth 0.0.1. Let's see if I go ahead and say 0.0.2 here in my version number. I'll save this. I'll go ahead and I'll run this again. Okay, it uninstalled my old version and it installed the new version. Okay, so now let's navigate away. So now I am just in my home folder. I'm going to start up we'll clear this. I'll start up Python import pavutils.artifact as a.novel. Let's see if I can remember this. Title. Was it author? Let's see, hem. Year 1932. What else? Genre. Yeah, you know. Oh, but I don't have a text file for it. Well, I'll just do this. A.artifact. Hello. A.title. Oops. PAV artifact. Let's see here.
Oh, because you imported as A.
Right. I just broke it. Yeah, that's dumb. So let's call this art equals A.artifact. Hello. Then we'll say art.title. So now, anywhere in my computer, I can use this code. And anytime I change something in my PAV utils folder, I can then just reinstall it, and it'll install it centrally. So I only need to make updates to this version of Artifact right here, and I don't need to worry about losing track of what I'm doing. And if I were a conscientious person, I would go ahead and let's go into desktop PAV utils, and I would say git add all, git commit m. My library is done v 0.0.2. And you can see that it goes ahead and it commits everything, it adds it, and now I have it both set up in Git and it's installed locally, and I can run with the wind, right? Are there any questions? So now you know. Now you know how to install things locally inside your Python distribution so you can call them globally on your computer. Okay? So that's really what I wanted to do today. Show you how to make classes, how to make objects, and how to install things centrally. We still have about half an hour, 45 minutes if you want to do, if you want to practice. I'll help you make sure everything's going properly. Now, this won't work on the computer lab computers because you won't have the permissions to install the package centrally. But there are drinks at the Packhouse at 5, but I think we could show up even earlier than that, like 5:40 or 4:45 in about half an hour. So why don't we just hang out, do a little bit of coding together, and then we'll have drinks in about half an hour. Does that sound good? Cool. And if there are any questions, let me know.
Thank you very much.
Of course.